So what we wanted to discuss today was specifically on agentic payments today. And for that, I'll invite Pumpkin to come in and maybe take us through your thoughts and what we've been building on. And then we'll open the floor to everyone and really dive into what you guys have been building, what you've been exploring, and also folks like DAIAA, who we're really excited to see from you and hear from you in terms of the digital ID on Bitcoin. So hey, DAIAA, nice to have you here.
Hey, Paul, thanks. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So we'll just kick off the call in a bit and we'll get started. So I think the first order of business is maybe Pumpkin. You can come in and maybe kick things off.
Sounds great. Nice to see a few familiar faces, of course, from our previous call. Hope everyone here having a great morning, afternoon, or an evening. And welcome to the AI on Bitcoin call. And this edition of the AI on Bitcoin call is pretty interesting and contemporary to the 402 meta, which apparently is on the show just about on every other chain. But we are here to basically take ourselves back to a few years ago when this all really started with Bitcoin. And it just so happens that Bitcoin is literally the mother of every crypto cycle or invention, to put it that way, is probably the mildest. So I'm pretty sure some of you have already probably been building on 402, if not using 402 in some really interesting ways. And I would definitely be interested to catch up on that. But before we probably do that, we'll just maybe head on into some of the really cool facts or really interesting things around AI on Bitcoin, and more from a 402 angle. So next slide. I think the obvious here is that the origin of 402. So I'm just going to go ahead and drop a link to the RFC editor from 1997. So this is a time machine call, everyone. So I'm just going to take you all back to 1997. So if you just take a look at what's on top of your web page, if you opened it right now, you can see 10.4.3 is 402. That's the HTTP status code, which was just not really detailed. And as the authors, including the Tim Berners-Lee's team here, it's just this code is reserved for future use. So this is how it all started. So the idea was that there would be a really successful micropayment systems at some point in time, and we would sort of latch on 402 to that. And the time is now, apparently. And so if you just scar a few years forward from there, obviously the Cryptonomicon highlights the corporations running on these gold-backed sovereign electronic cash. So that's pretty much used for day-to-day transactions, although there's no concept of 402 which is highlighted in this book, but it's just like a pretty interesting thing that happened just around the corner when 402 was created. And then, of course, the whole business model of the internet just changed, in my opinion, when ads became mainstream with the Google launching AdSense. I believe from then onwards, we saw a different version of the internet where it was no longer about read-write. It was more about monetize it without figuring out how the user would probably be able to afford it or be able to pay for it. And I believe that sort of was not a technical impediment, though, but I think it was some sort of a really different level of impediment for us to even start working on 402. But that's just my opinion. So if you look at how Bitcoin really changed this. Of course, with the creation of the white paper in 2008 and the proposal of one of the use cases being micropayments. And fast forward to Lightning. Lightning was pretty much used in really interesting ways, but then they kind of made it official that they would want to do M2M on Bitcoin through Lightning, and they sort of introduced this server program L402 back in 2023, and it kind of caught on for some time actually. There were some really interesting conversations around them. I don't want to really share this, but I just want to share this because I don't want people to miss out on it. It's a Binance link, so feel free to open it or not. It's totally up to you, but it does really interestingly highlight L402 way back before the whole meta started, really. So that's another really interesting caveat to how this all started before the whole x402 thing blew off, which is of course right now in 2025. So when we came across the x402 white paper, Parth and I had a conversation when Vegas was happening, just about the time in May, right? So we decided that, okay, this is happening, and we're going to make sure that there's a much better alternative to Lightning in terms of both the user experience or developer experience, but also agentic experience. So now we also have AX in a way, right? And that's something which we really look forward to sort of facilitate through 402, but much better. We'll learn a little bit more about that in the coming slides. So I'll just throw a 30,000 feet view on what's really happening in Bitcoin. So we, of course, have the Chaumian way of 402, which is the NUT24 proposal. And of course, we have Lightning, and followed by that, we have Tachi. I think we pretty much have clarity on the core mechanisms of all of them. But just to quickly highlight from Tachi's point of view, we essentially run on Taj Drisha's paper on U3XO, and we essentially kind of develop this immutable link of VTXOs, which are nothing but virtual UTXOs, and just make sure that they have the same key ownership checks, just the way Bitcoin does it. We would just do the same on a Bitcoin full node. So that's essentially what hash accumulated transaction proofs are, just a quick TLDR. But if you don't know what U3XOs are, I'd be happy to follow up on that maybe after the end of the presentation. But that's exactly how the core mechanism of Tachi really works. And in terms of flow, in terms of the AX, I would say it's kind of similar but different in certain ways. There are new parties which gets introduced in situations like L402, where they just introduce the macaroons and the verification stuff, which in the case of Tachi, we have not really designed it like that. We have just sort of kept it simple in a way that every Bitcoin full node would be able to facilitate 402 transactions. And I think, of course, with Chaumian, coins like eCash, it would be mostly based on blinding, which of course is great for privacy, but at the same time, I would say in terms of settlement off-chain, it would be kind of tricky. And then, of course, in terms of trade-offs, each have their own. In terms of the minting trust that you need to put on the mints, in the case of Chaumian way of doing things. But then if you look at, of course, Lightning, we obviously have the liquidity fragmentation issue and the lockups in the case of Tachi, which is something we can sort of figure out. Like we can fix it with linking to external bridges only if the agents do need it. But if they don't need it, this could be fully Bitcoin only. Just a quick drill down on each one of them. Will not take too much time here, but just a visual representation of the flow over here, and just try to highlight more in-depth detail, which we could probably go to after the end of the presentation. So we can move on to Lightning slide, the next one, and it's the same thing. I would say the focus is probably more on non-custodial solutions in the case of Lightning, which is just as Bitcoin native, with pretty much the throughput that we get with payment channels, of course, and the access management that comes with L402 servers. And in the case of Tachi, we have a completely different approach, which is it's a collective learning of impediments of different generations of L2 protocols. So we've been able to sort of address them with Bitcoin native proofs, with Tachi's U3XO, that's HAT, and then of course use of VTXOs so that there's no need for another layer of validators, which means you need to maintain another blockchain, which we have obviously removed here. And then I think in terms of scalability or in terms of the throughput that the system would be able to handle, needs to be sort of economically viable, and we sort of have that because it's just a proof management system at the end of the day, which is not a lot of compute demand. And then, of course, in terms of AI native readiness, it's just the same APIs that they would be working with, just the way it would on Bitcoin, but much faster. So that's just a quick drill down on these three approaches. But if you want to take a look at who's really implementing this and how early we really are, you should take a look at 402.markets, which is backed up by L402 and Chaumian. So Cashew and L402 sort of we have seen a common collaboration of both of these for 402 at 402.markets. It's really early, and you currently wouldn't see any agents or APIs listed there except for a test API from the team. But that's how early we are, which is fine. But it's still worth highlighting that there's something out in the market which is pretty interesting. So I'll just stop here, take any questions, and we'll probably want to also maybe discuss about anybody already building on 402, if not using 402, and if there are any feedback that we could take to make this better at Tachi. But I'd personally be interested in catching up with you later on. Thanks.
Yeah, I would love to open up the floor to everyone. Obviously, for those of us who've been listening to founders who are bringing on-chain kind of AI payment models to different blockchains, everyone's been excited by the x402 paradigm, right? Especially on Base and now on Solana. But why we're really harping on this in this call is because we all need to understand that the ground is being built on top of BTC to do the same thing, right? And there have been two approaches which have already gone live. Of course, they have their drawbacks, right? So what Pumpkin just mentioned about Lightning's L402 and Cashew's NUT24. Now, that's where we're trying to play in the space to understand, okay, what do devs really need on BTC? Because we obviously have this massive civil war going on with different developer cliques, either focusing on the digital gold narrative, and others who are now really pushing for composable Bitcoin, right? Not only for agentic payments, but for any sort of digital payment. In fact, you'll see some payments folks like Lightspark and others really trying to push that on their L2s. But what this means for us in the whole DAIAA community is you have to understand, what do we need from a Bitcoin perspective for real API monetization, right? And obviously, we want to go towards non-custodial Bitcoin wallets for this, right? So that we reach the eventual end goal of an actual agentic economy powered by SATs. But there's a massive set of gaps between this. So the next step would be, of course, in the next coming months, you should explore 402 markets, see which libraries are starting to come up for immediate integration and experimentation, right? And obviously, we will continue and we will start, in fact, publishing not only papers, but we'll start publishing testing kits and like an SDK skeleton for others to start using our primitives for the next gen of 402 payments infra on BTC. So that's kind of our concern and our focus from a team. But now, please, let me open up the floor to everyone. Yeah, Mike. Hey.
So I guess my question is, it seems to me like the Holy Grail, if we put it that way, is getting an AI agent to control a private key, right? I mean, it seems like an uncrossable chasm. I don't see how that's ever going to happen. And it seems to me like it's actually never going to happen. So my question is two parts. One, do you agree with that? And two, in the absence of that, how does AI even fit into the picture?
Sure. Yeah, Pumpkin, you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah.
I'll probably take a crack on this first. So I do believe that we have some form and shape of a few subset of people relying on machines to do some things for them. We do process our credit card details over a payment gateway today, which is as equivalent to a private key as it can get to nullify all our checking account balances. But I'm just gonna keep it real. I think there are two ways to go at it. So there is a more self-custodial version of this, which I think is going to emerge, where it's going to be an allowance-based spending kind of stuff, where you still own your keys, you don't share it with anyone, or maybe it's a multi-sig. That's okay, and that then you're probably allowing a bunch of sats to be used by an agent, which would probably share a shard, maybe, or there's an interesting concept in Ethereum called allowances in an ERC20 token, at least. So we could probably draw parallels to it, although it's an account-based system and we are UTXO, so we will probably have to figure out a design for that. And I think there are existing solutions which could be used to make it self-custodial and don't have to really submit the whole key to an agent. That's probably the most optimistic way to approach this at this point in time, at least. That's just what we have right now. And then, of course, we have the more vulnerable version where users probably don't like to be involved in any capacity whatsoever and probably want to dump it all to the agent for certain types of outcomes or tasks that needs to be achieved, and that's okay. They definitely fully are aware of all the risks and before they sign on to the second mode of submitting in entirety. I think that's probably the kind of two different roads that we can probably. I mean, those are the only two roads visible at this point in time in the juncture.
Sorry, can I just, Mike, just DAIAA here. Can you just elaborate on why you don't see it? Is it for the reasons that Pumpkin sort of outlined there, that you don't see agents controlling private keys, that your concern is? Is it around the risks of delegating responsibilities to agents?
My concern is that you really can't. So AIs are weird. There is no way you can keep them from giving somebody information. Are you familiar with the work of Pliny? Not Pliny the Roman, Pliny the modern Pliny, who jailbreaks AIs all
Oh
the time.
yeah, there's AI models. Yeah. I've seen some of his threads. Yeah, he's like always the first guy to jailbreak the models, right?
Exactly. So he'll be the first guy to steal your keys. And if he isn't, somebody else will, right? So whatever jail you put in place in front of that private key can be broken by someone like Pliny. That's my concern. That's why I don't.
Okay. You're talking about generally in terms of the architecture of any AI agent, in
Yeah,
terms of
any
having
AI
access to
agent at
private
all.
keys.
And I don't.
Okay, understood.
I see them getting much better than they are today, but I don't see them
Right.
ever getting to the point where they can actually be trusted with a private key.
Okay, so I'll just quickly, I don't have full visibility on this, but I have seen inklings of where developers are creating control rails for this. So firstly, not having pure LLM-based models being the direct connect points to a private key, but instead having in the middle a very limited MCP SDK with whitelist and blacklist controls, which are not from the LLM's point of control. So they have another, I would say, either agentic or non-agentic logic, which does the payments and the whitelisting and blacklisting for those transactions. So it's outside of the LLM's, I would say, even point of view or control. I think that's one way they compartmentalize it. I think that would be the way to go.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good. I hadn't thought of that. Great.
Yeah.
Yes. I've seen some threads on Twitter a few months back where they were doing this, and this is purely, by the way, Web 2, right? So even in Web 2, people are saying, hey, what if I have a clearinghouse agent infra, and it has to make thousands to thousands, so end-to-end transactions happen? How would it make it happen without someone just hacking and taking over their escrow account, for example? So that was one of the ways they looked at making it happen.
Yeah, and look, I completely agree with that approach. I think this is actually a generally more fundamental issue between LLMs and agents. It seems to me that this is really a really important line of demarcation that we need to establish across the industry in terms of a separation between LLMs as pure thinking inference machines versus agents that execute actions based on those inferences. And the AI industry generally isn't thinking that way. I was on this really interesting call with, I think it was like Stanford or one of those universities yesterday, where they were talking about memories and, hippocatic memory systems and just how you train. And I asked the guy who was giving the presentation do you make a separation between agentic memory versus LLM memory? And he was like, not really. That, in his world, that yes, they are different, but he doesn't see the need to separate them. But for me, that is actually the key line of demarcation. Because if you manage these in agent systems that are where the inference of the LLM is separated and guardrailed, that's the way you can protect everything. That's where you can protect all the risks, all the dangers that are associated with LLMs on one hand. So I think that's the first starting point. I think when you start from that point, then you can then have auditability, traceability, accountability in terms of those actions and state changes that follow those actions that flow all the way through. That's essentially how we're approaching it with iCubes, and we're pretty much there now in that sense of executing in that paradigm.
Yeah, in fact, after this, I was going to ask you, Delhi, to share your screen and take us through the latest updates and what you've shared with us as well. Would love to have the group hear from you as well. By the way, Alan, I think you raised your hand, so please go ahead first.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about the path of 402, similar to MCP. Do you see it standardizing, or is it just going to be definitions for different applications, and the API is figured out by AI to be able to communicate or process payments?
Oh, you're meaning like a stripped down MCP, or you're saying like a standardized 402?
Yeah, a standardized 402. I mean, how across the market, which one works the best, and what is everybody?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you saw the A2P from Google, right, that's their approach to having their own agent payments protocol. Sorry, AB2. So the agent payments protocol is AB2, developed by Google itself. And of course, they're trying to get a lot of the key players. In fact, I think Virtuals as an ecosystem is trying to experiment with that. So that would be one standard, that these big folks open source, and then they try to get others to join in. So A2P or AB2, if you guys take a look, I think it's A2P, so agent payments. And of course, the whole point of Coinbase pushing the x402 standard on Base is the same attempt, right? They want to make Base the easiest way for composable stablecoin agentic payments. So our goal as Bitcoiners is to make sure that it does not stay in those siloed gardens. We want to make Bitcoin also a suitable alternative, which has similar rails for devs and for businesses to build on. That's our goal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ju-
That'll
just to
that'll
start-
lead to, you know, some sort of standardization across all of the different silos as you mentioned. I mean, is there going to be a protocol of protocols, or is it going to be, you know, still individual chains doing things, I'm saying, their own way?
Just to sort of add on to what Parth mentioned and to sort of address your follow-up question on, so that's what we call discovery issue in the agentic payments section. So we have a few really interesting proposals on the other side with Ethereum. So they have been developing EIPs like ERC 8004, 8048, and 7825. These are primarily protocols that really help establish trustless agents through registries, essentially maintaining reputations in certain interesting ways. And then, of course, with that data, people could build interesting discovery marketplaces. Think of them as, you know, Magic Eden, OpenSea combined in a way. I think that's probably the closest example I may have from outside Bitcoin, but it may not be the best example. But yeah, so there are some really interesting work going on for discovery, which is probably going to be the protocol of protocols for the APIs, for the MCPs, and of course the agents. So it's all going to be layered down into data interacting with the MCP, which just treats the data as a resource, and then of course pays for it with 402 payment protocol. It could be any implementation for that matter, depending on where the data provider really likes to settle their accounts, and that's just where this all lands down to be honest. And then of course the MCPs are going to be probably domain specific than being domain agnostic. So you'd probably have an MCP which is going to grow out and sort of have a blitzscale total build out of the context for just one domain. So let's just say stocks or equities and trading and those kind of stuff on one hand, and then there would probably be one for environmental data so that people could work on climate actions and so on and so forth. And then of course you would have a bunch of agents sprawl up on that. So that's the sort of the layered sort of dissection of this from a discovery point of view.
Okay, that makes sense. So using the same type of model that the agents figure out how it's defined and then work with it, like going for tools for MCP. What's available? How do I interact with you? What do I do with the payment system itself? And then now you have a standardization across how to get to the data and how to do it rather than what it is up front. Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Awesome. Man.
Exactly.
No, I really appreciate this. All right, we're just at the end of the hour,
No, I
but
just
really
use-
appreciate this, and I'm glad that we got deep into this. And if you remember, Delhi, like what we had discussed was that this DID component and also reputation management component would be one of the key primitives which would be onboarded to Apache itself, so that we enable the other elements of the agentic economy directly on BDC. So we've of course seen on ICP and others where there are other L1s who unfortunately have the man in the middle canister approach. So we're in fact looking at how to now make it purely Bitcoin native, because again, institutions who hold Bitcoin would not want to move the control of Bitcoin even temporarily to canisters which are finalized on another L1. So it's kind of the issue with merge mining chains or other chains taking control of Bitcoin. So that's where we really need to work on, right? So
yeah, no, absolutely, and I agree, and effectively, and we use the we pick the pieces that work. So we use like ICP to manage reputation, for example, in this decentralized manner, and to effectively push all of our primitives to Bitcoin. But effectively, what they are big, you could run an iCube or a CryptoCent or any of those through Lightning or any kind of Bitcoin protocol, because they are Bitcoin primitives in that sense. So ICP in our model is really just an issuing kind of entity rather than like a custodian in that sense. But totally agree.
I think that's the right way to use all L1s and L2s. And no, I would love that we have these primitives coming up, and kudos to your team and yourself for making this happen. So this is another very key building block, which is required in the overall agent economy on Bitcoin. And of course, what we had earlier talked about, which is where we see Tachi coming in as solving a lot of the Bitcoin native proofs of sovereign micropayments directly on BTC. So that's kind of the next step for us as a team. And of course, we'll definitely be integrating iCube for this. So really appreciate it. And I think we're just closing off the hour. So thank you everyone for coming. Let's continue the discussion in the Telegram group.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, it was great.
Thanks, Parth.